and it was Listerine, and I remember Listerine and pineapple juice, which you used to get, and I can't stand them now, you know. When I smell them, I hate them. I remember them coming, I think Heron was with him one time. He'd come in the night time with a box, a red box with a red light on it, and give me this thing which was very awful. It was very painful. Of course, it all comes clear now, you know. I was getting ECT without anaesthetic.
Where was the pain?
Oh, all over. You were rigid, and lights went on in your head, and you just wanted to scream out. It was fear, too. It was the fear.
ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. 110 volts for 3 seconds through the frontal lobes of the brain.
At Chelmsford, many patients undergoing deep sleep received electric shock treatment daily without their knowledge or consent.
So I distinctly remember not signing for anything in the hospital, and I distinctly remember not giving any permission to give shock treatment. It's the last thing. So when I found out that I actually got shock treatment, I felt that I'd actually been, like, raped.
Disturbed by such reports, an Australian Civil Liberties group conducted an investigation into the use of ECT at Chelmsford.
Our research was that it was a criminal assault that was occurring because patients could actually remember having electric shock treatment, undergoing deep sleep treatment. Now, psychiatrists pass that off as being hallucinations. It's all part and parcel of being able to use this thing that the person's mentally ill, so therefore they don't know what's going on. But these people hadn't spoken to each other. They'd never even met each other. And yet time and time again the statements were coming up that they remembered the pain of the electric shock treatment.
It was not only disturbingly easy to get into Chelmsford, but as another patient, Wayne Whitty, found, it could be extremely difficult to get out.
My husband always visited me every day if I was in hospital. He heard gurgling sounds from behind a screen, and Dr. Heron walked out past him. He'd apparently finished giving me electric shock treatment, which my husband didn't know I was having. And he would have stopped it. And anyhow, he poked his head around the screen and found it was me gurgling, and I had blood coming from my mouth and nose. And he was horrified, and Sister rebuked him and said he had no rights to be there. And he said, well, that's your opinion. And he then made his mind up that he wanted me out, and he told them he wanted me to leave. And they said, well, you can't take your wife out unless you've paid the bill. Now, we were very young, and we had already paid out massive amounts of money. And he said, I don't have that sort of money. And they said, well, you can't take your wife. He was so distressed that he rang my parents, and for the first and only time in our lives, he asked them could they loan him the money to take me from this dreadful place. So my mum had to get a taxi to the bank, draw the money out, and get a taxi to Chelmsford to give him X amount of pounds. I can't recall the amount now. It was quite a large amount, which they took gleefully, because we found out later that that's really what the bottom line was. And then, once I was paid for, so to speak, I was allowed to leave.
Deep sleep was undoubtedly a cheap option. An investigation of Dr. Bailey's accounts shows that he maintained a healthy bank balance at the expense of his suffering patients.
Take us down to the beach to collect shells. Jane and I got on fabulously when we were young.
He was an 18-year-old kid making a fast buck. He was caught with about 250 LSD tabs on him. The solicitor that my father got, Levi, said, well, this is it. You can either go to jail for 10 years or you can agree to undergo psychiatric treatment. And of course we thought psychiatric treatment was lying on a couch and looking at ink blots. And we're saying, oh, you know, quick, take the psychiatric treatment, anything to stay out of jail.
But Jay ended up having deep sleep treatment.
I walked into his room and I got the shock of my life. Because I'll never forget, he was lying there and he just looked like a skeleton. He'd lost so much weight. His hair had fallen out and his eyes were closed, and yet his eyeballs were bulging out through the eyes and moving, and he just looked terrible. And I ran to him and I put my arms around him. I said, Jay, it's me. And he said, Mish, Mish, and he couldn't open his eyes. He said, is that you? I said, yes, it's me. And he said, sit in front of the cupboards. Don't let the monsters get me. He was hallucinating because he was just so full of drugs. When he came out of deep sleep, he was totally addicted to barbiturates. And he used to overdose frequently. And if at any time Jay wanted more, he just used to go to other doctors. I came in and right over here, his bed was right here, and he was dead. He was cold. Now, he told me he was going to commit suicide. He'd told me 3 weeks before this. And I said, don't, Jay, don't be silly. I mean, you know what it'll do to our parents. And he said, oh, well, there's no difference between being alive and being dead. This is the type of thing he was saying by this stage. And I said, don't. Anyway, and I later found out that the night before he'd gone to see his girlfriend and said, well, you won't see me anymore. And then, of course, he did it.
Jay's death was not an isolated case of suicide. At least 24 people committed suicide after receiving deep sleep treatment at Chelmsford. Incredibly, the Chelmsford doctors continue to dispute that there's any connection between the suicides and the treatment. But they cannot so readily dismiss those who actually died inside Chelmsford while undergoing deep sleep. This is the only known film of Dr. Bailey at work in Chelmsford Hospital.
Just lie back. No one's going to hurt you, Margaret. Everything's all right. Won't hurt you. Just try and keep it.
Made in 1970 as part of an anti-drugs film, Bailey was presented as a caring doctor concerned about the health and welfare of young people. Tragically, the reality was very different, for it's now known that of the 1,127 people who received deep sleep treatment at Chelmsford Hospital, hundreds suffered permanent brain damage. For others, the effects were even more damaging. In 1967, Graham Carter and his wife Jane were on holiday celebrating their first wedding anniversary when Graham was injured in a bus accident. Although he recovered physically, Graham continued to get headaches, and in order to make an insurance claim, he was referred by his solicitor to Dr. Harry Bailey.
He was very fit, played sport. He was a plumber, so he was always very active.